San Antonio, Texas, 1980, 1979 maybe. I'm this little wingnut over here waving off into middle space, not looking at the camera. And this is my sister, and this is my grandmother. We're at the zoo. We went every summer when we'd go stay with my grandparents. Fast forward about 30 years or so, and back in San Antonio with my grandmother at her house, Christmas lunch is over. We're having cookies, we're having coffee, we're holding hands, we're having a chit-chat like we always do at holidays. And she looked at me and she said, "Michael, I don't want you to think that I'm morbid. I don't want you to think that I'm crazy, but I would love it if you would make my casket." And at the time, she was in relatively good health for a grandmother-aged person. So it wasn't an urgent thing, and I was a little shocked and didn't quite know what to say at first. I said a bunch of nervous nonsense at first. But eventually I realized, this woman has the courage to look at her timeline, see that it's finite, see that the end of it is probably coming pretty soon, and she wants to do something proactive and unique with that time. Then the least I could do was say yes and make her the casket. So the whole family wasn't necessarily immediately on board. There were some that thought it was a little weird for her to ask her grandson to do that, right? But we were doing it anyways. That's what she wanted. She wanted something a little more simple than you might see in your mind when you close your eyes and I say the word casket. None of the brass, none of the wingdings, none of the high gloss. She wanted something a little more simple that was a little more relatable for her and a little more personal and a little more TLC in it, right? That's why she asked me to do it. So that's what we set out to do. We started then in the normal design process. We went through iterations of drawings and we reviewed them and we talked about them, what she wanted, what she didn't want. I threw in my 2 cents as a builder and we got to work. I had a ton of concerns. There was that if you don't have time to do it right the first time, when are you going to have time to do it over? That definitely came into play here, right? This thing had to work seamlessly and smoothly on that day. Nothing could go wrong. I was a little freaked about it. I was imagining this like Seinfeld episode that was going to be named after me. The one where the grandson makes the casket, and a handle pulls off in Kramer's hand, and the casket falls on the ground, and the lid falls off because the grandson didn't make the latch work right, and Kramer rolls into the grave, and that's the end of it freezes, and that's the end of the show. So I did a lot of research. I over-researched a little bit because I was dead set on making this work. Timing was excellent in that a church in Austin, which is where I still lived at the time, was getting rid of their church pews and turning into a chair church instead of a pew church. And they hollered at me and asked me if I wanted them, and I said, absolutely, I want them. I'm going to turn them into grandmother's casket. So we picked them up, and we got 10 of them. I only needed 2 for a casket. If you ever need to estimate how many pews you need to make a casket, need about 2, give or take, 15-foot-long pews. And so we resurfaced the material, turned it into something we could start fresh with, and I put together a simple box, the best way I knew how, that just did what it needed to do, but was slightly personal, just a little bit, and didn't have anything extra, just the box, handles where they needed them, latches where you need them, and a B on the end to signify that it was hers. Her name is Melba Braddock. So we're done, right? I built it, she saw it, she liked it, and that kind of felt like a we're done moment, right? Sort of. But then now what? Now it's a waiting game. A waiting game where you hope you're waiting for a really long time, right? You want to be waiting in this case. Normally it's a nuisance, but we wrapped it up in plastic and put it on the shelf, and we waited and hoped we were waiting for a really long time. Again, she was in good health when she asked me, But as time moved on, she was in less good health. And we'd speak on the phone, and she'd say, Michael, last month I thought we were going to need that thing. I thought it was going to be time. And it's hard to know what to say in those kind of moments. You've already had to say, grandmother, your casket's ready, you know? And, and then, when she'd go through a hard time, I'd say, well, again, it's ready when you need it, when the time comes. I'm really glad you don't need it yet, glad you're doing better. More time passes. Cancer now kind of enters the equation. She goes through treatment. It comes back. She goes through treatment. It comes back. She goes, the routine. And eventually, it got to be too much. And her time with us was finished this summer. And it was time to put the casket to use. Phase 2, sort of the process, I guess, for the casket. So I took it down there and let it do what it was always intended to do. The first part of the process was creation and building. This part was a little more somber, a little more surreal. But ultimately, it did everything it needed to do. There was no Kramer moment during any of the services. It did what it needed to do, and it did a lot. It did a lot more. Those days, I'm sure we've all experienced, are surreal, right? And in addition to having to talk about sadness, having to talk about grief, having to talk about how good of a job that the funeral home did on grandmother's makeup or whatever, we got to talk about this. We got to rally around this thing that was our whole family's casket. Anybody who was on the fence at the beginning of the process, by the end, was totally on board and just as proud as anyone to introduce me as the grandson that made the casket. Which was touching, which gave me a little more attention on those days than I really wanted, but that was fine. I was happy that we were all proud of this thing. It gave us the sense that we had a little say in the situation. And then out, at the burial, the graveside service, right? Again, it was familiar. It wasn't an anonymous box that we had to remember that our loved one was inside of. It was our box. We knew it. I knew it really well. I'd spent a lot of hours with that thing. But you knew it was her in there. Her remains, anyways. And everyone left, the graveside service, and I was leaving, and I was confused because the casket's still above ground. And, on TV, they throw the dirt in. Everybody throws the dirt. Everybody does it differently, I guess. But I was certain that my conversation with her wasn't over yet. So I hung back, just me and my mom, and watched and helped this nice man, lowered into the grave. And on a super hot, super humid June day in San Antonio, this precious thing that I had taken care of, so it would be perfect for her on these days. Now it was time for this nice man to, in a very matter-of-fact but kind way, cover it up with rocks. And all that preciousness just collapsed into a shovelful of dirt. And realized then that maybe now my responsibilities to her were truly over. And that the preciousness didn't live in that casket, right? The preciousness lived in the moments we got to share at the end of her years. That Christmas that she asked me that crazy question was a gift for all of us. I don't know if she realized it was a gift to the whole family, but it definitely was. It was a gift to me. I got to do a little bit of reflection that I probably wouldn't have been able to do in such a condensed period of time at that point in my life. But also she gifted us a lot of time together. We always had something to talk about, those last years, we had this special project that was our project. And when everything else for her was kind of falling apart, we were building something. Thanks.